Like, every game is now expected to offer options for smooth turn and snap turn, while back in 2016, I think a lot more people were just playing pure room scale VR without ever thinking about wanting to virtually turn with a joystick. Well, it was even before the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift was released. So over time, the way how you develop a PCVR game has definitely changed, I think. There are a lot more conventions now that players expect games to follow. Like, every game is now expected to offer options for smooth turn and snap turn, while back in 2016, I think a lot more people were just playing pure room scale VR without ever thinking about wanting to virtually turn with a joystick. But I think to answer the question, it's a lot of fun to develop a PCVR game because PCs are, well, really powerful. As a PCVR dev, you have so much freedom to do whatever you want with all the power of like an RTX 4090 and 32 threads of an AMD Ryzen 7950X. I do find it really fun to always design the highest graphics options in CubeVR specifically for the best currently available GPU, and just always keep pushing the graphics further and further. And there is no other VR platform that allows for this kind of constant improvement of graphics. I mean, I was just thinking about what kind of game I would really enjoy working on. It was back in 2016 when only very few VR games actually were announced yet. And there was one big problem I saw personally with all those VR games. They all kind of looked like simple mobile games. You know, games like Fantastic Contraptions and Job Simulator. That were the kind of games that got all the attention at the beginning of 2016. And while those are not bad games, I personally just absolutely love high-end realistic graphics. I wanted to have VR games that try to push the boundaries of what graphics can do. And I wanted to have games that felt like the first time you launched the first Crysis game, basically, while also being designed from the ground up for VR, with everything in the game fully being designed for VR motion controller input, with cool mechanics that would absolutely be impossible with a keyboard and mouse or gamepad input. So I was really missing that mix of unique new VR mechanics and awesome high-end graphics. And I was already very experienced with Unreal Engine back then and quite convinced that I could easily make any game I want, so I decided that I will just make exactly that. And I love low-level C++ programming with a lot of focus on writing really fast optimized code. And while most genres of games do not really need extremely high-performance code, there is one unique genre of games that does need it, and that's voxel games, where you have an infinite procedurally generated world that is generated on the fly, and the code for that has to be very optimized if it should look good and be fun to play. So that's why I then decided to work on a beautiful VR game, a beautiful VR voxel game with an infinite procedurally generated world designed from the ground up for unique new VR interactions with really high-end graphics, with the goal of trying to make it the hopefully most beautiful VR game. So that was the idea for CubeVR, and it still is now. I think it's very important that as a developer you choose a game that really fits exactly your strengths and your own dream of what VR should be. Like, people will notice if your game feels like a game you want to play yourself, or if it's just something that you're not really sure about yourself. So there are basically two options to make a reasonably big game if you decide to make a big game. Like, I mean, you can decide to make a small game, and a lot of indie devs can make small games relatively quickly. But then they usually feel like small indie games, and often that's not necessarily what players are interested in to really play long term. So if you want to make a reasonably big game, you have two options. You either have a large team that works on it for a short time, like 2 or 3 years, or you have a small team that works on it for a long time. And I'm following the second approach. I just work on it for a long time, and then I can get a lot of stuff done as well. So yeah, I've been constantly working on CubeVR full-time since February of 2016. That's over 8.5 years by now. And in 8.5 years, you can achieve quite a lot, even with a small team or when working alone. And yeah, even when you have to do all those things like talking to people in your Discord community and making trailers and screenshots and maybe posting stuff on Twitter every once in a while. But I like to focus really on the develop the game and hope that the marketing is mostly just word of mouth from players who enjoy the game. I think that's ideal if it can be like that. Honestly, it's probably not doing too great at the moment from the perspective of devs working on native VR-only games for PC. I mean, a lot of VR devs are now working only on Quest games and kind of ignore PC, and that's quite sad. But when only looking at PC, I think a lot of PCVR players seem to primarily play flat games with a VR mode, like racing sims or flight sims. And the Steam algorithm really isn't the best to actually make people aware of the existence of pure native VR-only games like cyubeVR or similar games like cyubeVR, like games that are not racing games or flight sims. I would say cyubeVR is doing relatively well on PC because it already had so many years to make people aware of its existence. But I see many new PCVR releases on PC get way too little attention. And I think a big problem for the PCVR market in recent years was also a lot of bad luck with the GPU prices. First, there was all the crypto mining stuff making GPUs really unaffordable. And now it's AI getting all the attention from companies like Nvidia or AMD, and there's just too little incentive for them to release cheap high-performance GPUs that are needed so much to drive VR headsets with really high resolutions. And then there also aren't a lot of popular up-to-date PCVR headsets. Most people who play PCVR do it on a Quest connected to the PC at the moment, I think, according to the Steam hardware survey. But when you connect a Quest to the PC, you always have the issue of the compressed video transmission. And most people will probably use their regular router for a wireless video transmission from the PC to the Quest and play with quite a lot of visual artifacts, maybe not even knowing how good PC VR games could look when you use a native DisplayPort VR headset with an uncompressed transmission from the PC to the headset. You know, that's quite sad. Like, PC has these really cool tech things that make it so much better than what a Quest could do, but you also have to use these features like DisplayPort connections to a VR headset. And the second most used VR headset is the Valve Index, which is, I think, over 5 years old by now and just looks quite low res by today's standards, unfortunately. Yeah, the Pimax Crystal Light is probably the first time in a long time that there's actually a relatively affordable PC VR headset with really good specs and very high image quality. So if you do well, maybe you can give PC VR a bit of a boost with that again. That would be nice. I think the best thing anyone can do to help the PC VR industry is to actually buy and play VR games. Especially the games from devs that actually focus on native PC VR games. That's really the main thing that people can do. If people buy games, then devs make more games, and if no one buys games, then devs can't make games.